Hello again, Zach Wilson, Hood County Chess Club here, continuing the series on attacking the king. Here we're going to take a look at Pillsbury's mate, which really is just a variation of the popular Morphy's mate, which we'll look at in a different video. The defining characteristic of Pillsbury's mate, however, is the use of a double check. Now, if you're trying to escape a check, you have three ways to get out of check. You can capture the offending piece, you can block the attack, or the king can simply move and run away from the attack. When there's a double check, meaning two pieces attacking the king simultaneously, you can't capture two pieces at once, and it can't block two pieces at once, so your only option is a king's movement. So let's take a look at the power of the double check. Here we have the basic position of the Pillsbury's mating pattern, and let's see what happens here. We have a double attack coming from the rook and the bishop. You can see the bishop and the rook are both looking at what is considered to be weak at this moment, the weak g7 pawn. And whenever you have the typical castled position with the king and the three pawns in front, you want to pick one of these targets and start aiming your pieces at them so that you can create an attack. One of my personal favorites, which is not shown in this mating pattern, is of course the weak h7 square, simply because white's light squared bishop can easily develop to d3 and have an instant attack here. White's knight on g1 moves to its natural square on f3, which can simply hop in to g5 and also attack there. So each of these can be a target. And in Pillsbury's mate, the target is the g7 square. So hopefully through my talking, you've had a chance to look at this position and see what move you would make here. And it is rook captures for check, and it is protected by this bishop. So the king has no choice but to step into the corner. Now, in other mating patterns, this rook might move somewhere else, but Pillsbury's mate makes use of the double check to gain an advantage immediately. So he sacrifices the rook, and you can see both pieces are attacking the king. So this rook, for instance, could not capture this rook and satisfy removing him from check because it doesn't stop this bishop from check. So we have to move the king, and the king does have a move. He can simply capture the rook and escape the attack of this bishop on the h8 square. But this allows white to bring in his other rook, claiming checkmate. As you can see, this bishop is taking away the key runaway squares, and then this rook is causing the checkmate. So that is Pillsbury's mate making use of that double check right here. Let's take a look at the next example. This is from 1899. This is in the middle of a game. And again, we see the typical castled position. Take note that in these examples, there is no defending knight on f6. That is a critical thing, because we can see that that allows access on the long diagonal from the bishop. And even though it looks like white's position here is busted, all the pawns have been moved out, whenever that happens, you have to beware of the rooks coming in down the g file. So of course, here comes the rook. King steps over. Hope you can see the double check coming from the bishop and the rook. So it forces the king to get himself out of check. This allows the next rook to come in. The queen is the only block we had available, and that is checkmate. So that's an example of use in a game. So let that be a lesson to you as the black player in this game. Somewhere in the middle of this game, this pawn got moved. And it looked like black was doing a great thing, destroying white's castled position, creating opening lines of attack. But opening those lines is a double-edged sword because it gave us the opportunity for this rook to attack black's king. So in this example here, we actually have the defending knight, which is also defended by another piece. So you might think that the mating pattern's not available. Well, we can simply remove that piece, and now you can see the bishop, and you can see the rook, and you can see the other rook wanting to come over. Well, as you noticed, our queen was sacrificed. So let's back that up just a moment. Look at all the threats on the board. Black wants to take this queen. We're looking at the possibility of a mating pattern. So we're willing to sacrifice our queen. When we take that knight, look at Pillsbury's mate waiting to happen. Black takes the bait and wastes the time to take the queen, which allows us now for the check, the double check, and then this would be checkmate except black can block. So he blocks the first time, he blocks the second time, we still have checkmate with Pillsbury's mating pattern. Let's back that up for just a moment. What if, when we took here and got ready to do our attack, what if black simply captured our bishop? What could we do then? We could take the bishop because, pin to win, this pawn cannot move. Okay? So we enter a fianchettoed position. We move our knight that was hanging to safety, and we're up an entire piece. Let's count that. We take a knight for 3 points. They take our queen. Let's back that up. Let's make it here where they take our bishop for 3 points, so it's equal. We take their bishop. We're now ahead 3 points. They have to defend the checkmate threat. And we save our knight over here. So we're up an entire bishop. And this brings to point something you want to keep in mind. Oftentimes when you have the opportunity for one of these mating techniques or mating patterns that we're looking at in the Attacking the King series, it doesn't always end with checkmate. Oftentimes the threat of checkmate leads them to have to give up material or give up pieces to stop the checkmate. So while they're delaying the inevitable, losing the game right away, by going down in pieces, simply we're going to win the game later because we have a material advantage. So hopefully that made sense. Let's take a look at a variation of Pillsbury's mate. This time the bishop is on the opposite side, which covers some key squares. Notice this king, if this rook were to move, this king cannot run away because these squares are covered by the bishop. So it traps him in the corner, which is very important. So he's trapped, whether this rook is, whether this rook is here or not, he's trapped. So here comes the rook, he steps over, here comes the check, he steps over, and here comes the mate. All right, so you can see that this bishop simply repositioned himself to then cover the key squares. So let's take a look at that in our last example of Pillsbury versus Lee in 1899. This game lasted 21 moves, which is a relatively short game. Most games, in my experience, will go 40 plus moves, so 21 is less than half. So we have a queen's pawn opening, typical c4 attack, queen's gambit declined, orthodox variation with the knights to c3 and f6, traditional attack pinning the knight with bishop to g5, and we can see that these moves, you can study the opening if you want, it is the queen's gambit declined, and most of these moves were really on point until that move, b6, getting ready to fianchetto the bishop. That's not a typical maneuver in the queen's gambit decline. It really is kind of a waste of time. Black should have castled here. So white starts to open up the position. And now we're adding a pin because black did not castle the king. And pinning is a very strong tactic. Also, we should see that this is a key square that has been weakened by moving this pawn forward. White is threatening to attack in here because black has yet to get his bishop into the hole. So he fills the hole, but it's already a bit too late. He wasted a lot of time and left his king in the center. So what do? We attack the pinned piece again. So now this pinned knight is being double attacked by the bishop and the knight. All right, so he castles to get out of it. And what a great move. Defended by this central knight, attacking this bishop that has no defender. And so we're just clearing the way for this knight to jump into this hole. I think one of the big differences between amateurs and masters is that a lot of times us beginning players, we're always looking at the pieces. How many knights do I have? How many bishops do I have? Can I trade a knight for a bishop? Do I have a material advantage? How many points am I up? I think masters look a lot more at squares and pawn structures, and this knight right here is in just a killer position. Look at that fork. Look at how when it jumps in, it's going to be attacking that king, all because of that weak square. So weak squares are something you want to add to your game, but that's in a whole nother video. Right now we're talking about attacking the king. So the queen has to save herself, trades off the bishop, and now we have another pin. Using the pin, what a great tactic. And in comes the knight, snatching up this pawn. Can't really take back unless he wants to give up his queen. Queen has to move, okay. Attacking the undefended knight. But now what are we going to do here? We can attack the king with check. So what a great way to remove the knight. And now black opens up this hole. Okay. So now we see the position beginning to develop where the bishop is over here covering these key squares. And if we looked at the previous example, we know that this bishop is likely to reposition itself over here and then have access. Okay? So this was the worst move by black. It sure looks like a great move. He gets to take this pawn, gets to threaten the undefended rook. The problem is, anytime you do that, you want to be very careful of realizing that you've just opened a lane of attack against your open king. You don't want to open up the position. Before black took that pawn, this pawn was in the way. If, say, this rook was to come over, he wouldn't be attacking or threatening the king because his own pawn is in his way. Once that happens, white has an incredible move here. Go ahead and pause the video, see what you would do tactically to try and create an opportunity against black's weakened king. Well, if you found it, if you think the way Pillsbury does, you saw queen to f3. Wow, look at this. Defending the attacking the undefended rook, attacking the undefended queen, and setting the bait. What happens if the queen moves? If they take the queen sacrifice, rook, check, steps to the corner, check, steps out of the corner, check. And this would be checkmate if he didn't have the queen block, so now it's checkmate. Using Pillsbury's mate. So Pillsbury knew the mating pattern, knew the mating threat to come, and as a result, offered up his queen. What else could black have done here? Black could have moved his queen to safety, threatening our undefended bishop. But look at this. The bishop can exchange itself for the rook going up the exchange and simultaneously attacking this undefended rook. At a minimum, black's going to lose a rook here. So keep in mind that, again, mating threats sometimes win the game, other times lead to a material advantage. Well, I hope that Pillsbury's mate is helpful to you in a game. Remember that the signature of the Pillsbury's mate is the double check compared to, say, Morphy's mate, which you can see in another video. And that double check happens right here. We have the rook attacking the king. We have the bishop attacking the king. Double checks are very forcing. The only thing that the opponent can do is move their king, so it's easy to calculate. So keep that in mind whenever you see an opportunity against the g7 pawn. Well, please take the time to practice these patterns with a friend. Watch this video over and over again until you start to see these patterns more clearly in your games, because after all, you are what you repeat. Until next time, this is Zach Wilson, Hood County Chess Club.